economical impact of a little over $88 billion nationwide. Texas accounts for 15.5% of the cash receipts for cattle in the United States.
Cattle production represents the largest single segment of agriculture in Texas and the United States.
Texas is the #1 producing state in the country, with a total of 13.8 million cattle. That's twice as many as the next largest state.
As of January 1st, 2016, the cattle population in the United States had reached 92 million.
So we've established that the cattle industry is a large business that is very important to our state and country. However, the cattle industry is also extremely important to my community. And in fact, within a 200-mile radius of my hometown in Perryton, Texas, resides the largest cattle feeding region in America, and annually markets more than 6 million fed cattle. That is an astonishing 28% of the nation's fed cattle production. But could this all come to an end? Is it a possibility Texas could lose a billion-dollar industry and a way of life? In the near future, will a cheeseburger become a delicacy instead of an American staple? When deciding on a topic, we took a look at a wide range of things, from GMO labeling, antibiotic-resistant superbugs, drones, and even transgenic animals. But after much debate and consideration, we finally decided on the topic, is a cow eating my lunch? It may sound silly, but in all reality, it could not be more serious. Okay, let's start with a little debate, and we have a very knowledgeable panel that will debate the issue and let you decide. Is a cow eating my lunch? It is no secret that by 2050, the world's population will have grown from 7 billion to 9 billion, an increase of 32% and equal to 7 times the current US population. And with this growth comes the increase in the need for food. A popular belief exists that animal agriculture competes for food supplies and wastes resources. More simply put, we could abolish livestock and use the feed for food and help curb world hunger. The argument that it's wasteful to feed grain to animals is certainly not a new idea. It's been around at least since the book Diet for a Small Planet was published in 1971. But now, according to a 2015 National Geographic article, 5 Steps to Feeding 9 Billion, it would be far easier to feed the 9 billion people by 2050 if more of the crops we grew ended up in human stomachs. More specifically, this article went on to say that beef cattle were the biggest waste of our resources. Okay, let's meet the debaters. On the pro side is Kinley Vela and Lainey Schollenberger, and on the con side is Brecken Lecomte and Cameron Duvall. Let's start with the pro side, or those who think a cow is eating their lunch.
There is no doubt a cow is eating our lunch. If we eliminated or at least reduced meat from our diet, especially beef, it would be a more efficient way to feed people, better for our planet, and will save life's most precious commodity, water.
Actually, a cow is providing our lunch. In fact, the beef industry provides safe, affordable, nutrient-dense foodstuffs that support human health and well-being.
At first glance, the way to feed more people would seem clear. Grow more food by expanding farmland. Unfortunately, the world is running into significant barriers. Society already farms roughly 38% of the Earth's land surface, not counting Greenland or Antarctica. And most of that 38% covers the best farmland. Basically, we are out of land.
Improving yield also sounds enticing. The average global crop yield increased by about 20% in the past 20 years. That improvement is significant, but the rate is nowhere near enough to double food production by mid-century. Essentially, we have no choice but to reduce, if not eliminate, our carnivorous ways. Look at it this way. For every 100 calories of grain we feed animals, we get only 3 new calories from beef. Or it takes 6 to 12 pounds of corn to produce 1 pound of beef.
Exactly, Kinley. Did you know that beef eaters use 160% more land resources than people who eat a plant-based diet? A staggering 70% of grain in the U.S. is fed to farm animals rather than to people. The world's cattle population alone consume a quantity of food equal to the caloric needs of 8.7 billion people. That's more than the entire human population on Earth.
What you don't understand is the fact that cattle consume grass for a majority of their lives. often in places where nothing but grass will grow. As the public becomes more and more detached from agriculture, many people do not understand that some land will not produce cereal grains. Ruminant animals can take grass, which is inedible to humans, and turn it into something edible.
Most of the information you read or see about feed efficiency for cattle assumes they are fed grain their entire life, which is just not true. Cattle generally stay on forage until they weigh 800 pounds. Then they go to a feedlot for 120 to 150 days, where they are fed grain and quickly grown to 1,300 pounds.
Another misunderstanding the general public has is that feed rations contain only grain, when in fact they also contain byproducts, such as distiller grains, cottonseed hull, apple pomace, and wheat midds, which cannot be used in a human diet, but can be officially turned into meat and milk.
Let us consider this. According to the USDA, 35% of America's land is pasture land, on which we produce 25.8 billion pounds of beef per year. Of this land, only 8% is productive enough to be cropland. Now let's assume that beef consumption is completely eliminated. We would have to turn that pasture land into cropland to compensate for the 25.8 billion pounds of beef that would be eliminated from our food system. The environmental consequences of this could be much the same as the Dust Bowl.
You want to talk about environmental consequences? Raising beef for the American dinner table does far more damage to the environment than producing pork, poultry, eggs, or dairy. The biggest intervention people could make towards reducing their carbon footprints would not be to abandon cars, but to eat significantly less red meat.
Cattle digest food differently than we do. They're ruminant animals, meaning they have multi-chamber stomachs, which contain an abundance of bacteria that digest cellulose from the grass they eat. However, one byproduct of this magical digestive process is methane. An average cow in North America belches out 117 pounds of this toxic gas per year. Pigs and chickens don't do that.
Methane is a super strong greenhouse gas with 25 times as much global warming potential as carbon dioxide, which is the main climate villain.
From the atmosphere's perspective, eating half a pound of beef is about the same as burning enough fuel to drive an average American car 70 miles.
Globally, 14.5% of all greenhouse gas pollution can be attributed to livestock, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the most reputable authority on this topic. 65% of the pollutants come from raising beef and dairy cattle.
Emissions from cattle is actually much lower compared with sources like transportation, the energy sector, landfills, and other sources.
Cameron, you don't have a lot of choice where you get your electricity or throw your trash, but you have many choices when it comes to eating.
A large-scale reduction in meat consumption not only would result in the replacement of animal products with plant-based foods, but additional sources would be required for the diverse byproducts of animal agriculture, including hides, tallow, fertilizer, and pharmaceuticals. The environmental impact of making these byproducts synthetically could actually be much worse.
Besides that, the beef industry is becoming more and more efficient and leaving less of a carbon footprint. In 2013, the United States produced 13 million tons of beef, almost the same amount as it did in 1976. It achieved this by slaughtering 10 million fewer cattle from a herd that was almost 40 million head smaller. Due to the average slaughter animal packing 23% more meat today than it did in 1976.
If Americans eliminate beef cattle entirely from the landscape, they'd only be cutting emissions by about 2%.
2%? That's just not possible.
Kinley said 14.5% of all greenhouse gas pollution can be attributed to livestock. However, only 6% of that comes from beef cattle. And the reason it is just 2% is because more than 1/3 of the greenhouse emission can be attributed to fossil fuels and fertilizer used in raising and shipping feed grain. You would not expect the farmer to quit farming. After all, there's a hungry world to feed.
2% is very low and quite frankly unbelievable. But for the sake of time, let's not argue and assume you are right. Still, 2% is enormous and would be a great benefit to our environment. While reducing methane is important, a bigger factor concerning beef cattle is water.
In fact, according to a study done by the Stockholm Water Institute, in order to prevent catastrophic food shortages in our not-so-distant future, some suspect that the population will have to turn to a vegetation diet instead of an animal protein-based diet.
The article states, scientists fear there will not be enough water to irrigate crops to produce sufficient food for the 2050 population, because eating meat will use up more land for food crop production, and available water can be used to grow crops to feed people instead of animals.
It makes perfect sense. In the United States, a fifth of all grain production is dependent upon irrigation. For every pound of beef produced in the industrial system, it takes 2,000 gallons of water. That is a lot of water, and there's plenty of evidence that the earth cannot keep up with the demand.
More than 70% of the Earth's fresh water is used in agricultural production of plants and animals. It takes 100 to 200 times more water to produce a pound of beef than it does to grow a pound of plant foods.
And of all livestock, beef is by far the least efficient when it comes to water. It takes 127 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of goat meat, 468 gallons to produce chicken, and 567 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of pork meat. Compared to 2,000 gallons for beef, it's a no-brainer. They are a waste.
The idea that water shortages will force change to livestock production is not a new idea. Outlandish claims regarding the amount of water required for livestock production has been in the media's eyes for quite some time now. In fact, Newsweek once reported that the amount of water required for a 1,000-pound steer over its lifetime would float a destroyer. In all actuality, if you do the math, the destroyer would be high and dry by about 2 million gallons.
The beef cattle industry is becoming more efficient in terms of water use. According to a study published in 2015 in the Journal of Animal Science, the amount of water used to raise beef today compared to 30 years ago has been reduced by 12%. A recent study done by the University of California, Davis says it takes just 435 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of boneless beef.
You can't just count the water that the cow drinks.
The California Davis study actually takes into consideration the water used for the cow to drink, to irrigate pasture land that cattle graze on, to grow crops that cattle are fed, and to process the beef.
If you consider a pound of chocolate requires 2,847 gallons, and 1 almond requires 100 gallons, according to waterfootprint.org, 435 gallons doesn't sound so bad.
More than 713 gallons of water go into the production of 1 cotton t-shirt. The New York City water supply system leaks 36 million gallons of water every day. Yet you hear or read nothing about this.
Regretfully, we are out of time. We understand we've covered a lot of material on this issue and hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as we've enjoyed researching and presenting it. We all know it's tempting to reduce complex issues into outrageous sound bites. And as we all know, the truth isn't quite so easy. So we will leave you with a quick summary of our issue and let you decide. Is a cow eating my lunch?
Beef eaters use 160% more land resources than those who eat a plant-based diet. Beef is an inefficient way to feed the growing population. It makes much more sense to feed the people the grain that we feed animals.
Cattle consume grass for a majority of their lives, often in places where nothing but grass will grow. Ruminant animals can take grass, which is inedible to humans, and turn it into food.
14.5% of all greenhouse gas pollutants can be attributed to livestock. 65% of those pollutants come from raising beef and dairy cattle.
If Americans eliminated beef cattle entirely from the landscape, we would only be cutting emissions by about 2%.
It takes 100 to 200 times more water to produce a pound of beef than it does to grow a pound of plant foods.
A recent study done by the University of California, Davis says it takes just 435 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of boneless beef.
Thank you, and we'll now answer any questions that you might have.